You heard from a number of CEOs, the CEO of Archer Daniels Midland, the CEO of Target. How much do companies like those have in common when it comes to the issue of jobs going overseas or coming back?
Well, look, at its underlying theme, people were like-minded, saying we need a more competitive tax code, so there was no argument there. The name of the game is, how do you move forward and get this done? The most interesting thing was the distinction between the current CEO of Target, who was not a fan of the border adjustment, and the former CEO of Walmart, who was. And I think we're getting right at what this whole debate is about. That is, how do we make sure that we've got this tax code, which has been, you know, it's a throwback, essentially, 30 years of this, and we've seen what has happened to our supply lines. They've been pushed offshore. The former CEO of Walmart said, look, this, and I'm paraphrasing, this is worth doing this work. We can have a manufacturing renaissance if we go about doing this in a careful way and with smooth transitions. That's my big takeaway.
Congressman Roskam, there's been a lot of talk about a border-adjusted tax. We haven't seen the White House very fulsomely embrace the notion of having one. I know the chairman of your committee does want to see one in place. It's part of his blueprint. How much of a hurdle is it for you and others to overcome that you don't have full White House support of this yet?
Well, what we're working on is to make sure that there's one bill that's ultimately introduced, a bill that's supported in the House, by the White House, and the Senate as well. What we want to avoid is competing bills and so forth. So this is about the sort of the thrust and the parry of how this process works. And there's arguments and debates back and forth, but it's all within the totality of recognizing that our current tax code is failing. It's dissolving underneath us. And so the question is, how do we move forward? How do we deal with real growth? How do we deal with simplicity? How do we deal with making sure that the tax base doesn't continue to erode? And how do we make sure it's permanent? That is, it doesn't just expire in another 10 years.
When you're back in the 6th District talking to business leaders there who are wondering about certainty, the way all of this is going to unfold, what do you tell them? They're trying to plan for the future. You and others have said this could get done within this calendar year. Should they be betting on that?
They should be betting on that. I have a high expectation that 2017 is the year that we get this done. Last week, we had a manufacturer in from the Chicago area who essentially was laying out an argument that I've just echoed just now. That is, we need to move forward. And particularly, I represent a large manufacturing constituency, and these are folks that have been really struggling over the past several years. And they're saying, look, in part, it's related to the tax code. So in terms of planning, I think, you know, we've got a president of the United States who ran on fundamental tax reform. You've got these themes that are reverberating all over Capitol Hill, and this is the time to get it done. I think 2017 is the year.
Just sticking in the 6th District, if I could, you and others have called for the elimination of state and local tax deductions. I imagine that's politically difficult to do. A lot of people in your district, I imagine, take advantage of those deductions. How worried are you about the political consequences of taking away something like that, say?
Look, what we're trying to do is look at this in the totality of an entire tax reform plan. So there's nobody that's saying, hey, let's move away from the deductibility of state and local taxes in a vacuum. But if it's being considered, what are some other soft landings that we can do to incentivize people? What are the tax rates? What does this look like for the elimination of the AMT? This is my point, that what you want to do is talk about these broad themes and then continue to drive it down to then you're actually proposing legislation. So people like me are being incredibly careful about this. I want to make sure that my constituents are not at the raw end of the deal where somehow their state and local taxes are not deductible and yet they don't get any tax relief on the other side of things. So we're looking at this in totality, clearly.